Question number 7.
Thanks, Les Can. Well, your predecessor, Minister Francis Fitzgerald, of course, submitted I think the third and fourth reports to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and I understand you'll be representing us, if the government survives, in January for an examination on those reports. And some of the subjects you'll obviously be discussing will be the issue you've just talked about child poverty, child protection, services for children, education, health, disability services, and so on. And I was hoping that among those services that you would, or among those issues that you'd look at, would be the impacts of homelessness on our children.
Thank you.
Thanks, Can.
Minister number 7.
Thank you very much, and thank the Deputy for his question. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child establishes the Committee on the Rights of the Child, comprising independent experts, as the monitoring body for holding state parties to account regarding compliance with the Convention. That process involves states submitting periodic reports to the Committee and attending before it for the purposes of discussing the report submitted. Ireland's most recent attendance before the Committee was in 2006, and its most recent consolidated third and fourth report was submitted to the Committee in July 2013. Ireland is scheduled to attend before the Committee again in January 2016. While the actual meeting date has yet to be notified, it will occur between the 11th and the 29th of January. Before meeting individual state parties, the Committee receives reports from and meets with civil society interests and national rights monitoring bodies. These contacts inform the identification of issues the Committee intends to discuss with the state party concerned. In Ireland's case, the Committee met with these interests, including a meeting with young people as facilitated by the Children's Rights Alliance last month. To my department's knowledge, the Committee also received 3 parallel reports from the Children's Rights Alliance, from young people with the support of the Alliance, and from the Ombudsman for Children. The information gained from these sources has culminated in the recent receipt of a list of issues from the Committee in relation to the combined third and fourth report of Ireland, to which the Committee is seeking a written response by the 15th of October 2015. The Committee has made clear that the list of issues is not intended to be exhaustive, and it should not be interpreted as limiting or prejudicing the type and range of questions which members of the Committee might wish to pose in January next. Given the breadth of the UN Convention, the Committee's scope of interest is very extensive and essentially covers the responsibilities and activities of most, if not all, government departments and indeed many state agencies. Consequently, engagement with the Committee involves a very considerable exercise of cross-government liaison and consultation around issues that are relevant to particular departments and to a number of departments. The coordination work is the responsibility of my department. In that regard, it has established liaison arrangements with all government departments to process issues identified in the run-up to meeting the Committee, on which input from the individual departments will be required. The current position is that my department is preparing to communicate shortly with other departments on the contents of the list of issues recently received from the Committee.
Thank you, Minister.
The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade liaises closely with my department in relation to facilitating communications to and from the Committee.
Thanks, Lascan. Well, just in relation to the list of issues, Minister, will that include the impact of homelessness on children? The children of those families, 3,500 almost now, who are homeless in our city and county and other urban areas around the country. I noticed on the list for the 28th of June showed that 1,122 children were in emergency accommodation. I'd represent dozens of families in that situation, as I think you probably would yourself and other deputies would here today. We know from meeting these children that they're often the children of homeless families, that they're often very insecure, often sometimes distressed, unable to get easily to school, to recreation, to their basic facilities. The whole situation of living in hotels, and you'd be familiar with it again from your own constituency, in guest houses, often makes it very difficult to have a sort of ordinary child's life. Now, you mentioned the parallel reports. I know 2 of the organisations, of course, that Children's Rights Alliance, who I know are also focusing on the impact of homelessness on children. I met Dr. Niall Mundul myself with my own staff recently in relation to the Ombudsman for Children in relation to the impact of homelessness on children. And I note in his report he says that and I quote, "The state must address delays in the provision of social housing and ensure that emergency housing accommodation promised to families who experience homelessness is appropriate for children's needs."
Thank you,
so, Minister, you've said that you're meeting other departments. I just wanted to focus on the point of, are you meeting Mr. Alan Kelly's department? Are you bringing to his attention the very real distress and suffering of our children in this city this very minute in relation to homelessness? And what have you done yourself in relation to this? You've said,
we'll be back to you, Deputy.
You are the minister. You are the minister for all our children. Yeah. What are you doing right now to protect our homeless children?
Minister?
Thanks, Cairn.
Well, just to reassure the Deputy that the issue of homelessness has been on the government agenda for quite some time. I'm a member of the Cabinet Committee on Social Policy. As Minister for Children, I'm very concerned of the impact of homelessness on children. I'm very concerned too at the provision of accommodation and emergency accommodation, and that those provisions should reflect, insofar as they can, normality for families. And I accept that many times they don't, if there's no cooking facilities, etc. Equally, I will be concerned, as I'm sure the Deputy is, around other child protection issues, forcing large numbers of people into less than ideal accommodation at times on an emergency basis. And certainly, bed and breakfast and situations of that nature, whilst they are to be availed of on an emergency basis, do not represent any long-term solution. But there has been numerous meetings between members of the government, including myself and Minister Alan Kelly, around this issue at the Social Policy Committee.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Thomas P.
Thanks, Lascan. And Minister, have you met in this region? Have you met the city manager, Mr. Owen Keegan, the county manager of Fingal, Mr. Paul Reid, in relation to specifically? Have you or your officials met the Dublin Region Homeless Executive, Mr. Dick Brady? Have you any plans to actually inspect the conditions in which these homeless families are forced to live for 9-10 months, over a year in many cases, months and months on end? Have you actually spoken to the children in relation to this issue? You mentioned in the preparations for the report to the UN committee that you have a parallel report that the children themselves actually had input into. Have you spoken to them, even outside the type of information clinic or whatever situation you might meet these children, and actually looked at the accommodation and brought it to the attention of Mr. Kelly and Mr. Kenny that the situation we now have, where the numbers of homeless children have doubled in 8 or 9 months, it can't go on. We need the whole situation to be ended. And first and foremost, we need to stop a situation where children are being made homeless.
Minister, to conclude, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, just to confirm, I've met with all the individuals that you have mentioned, and on more than one occasion. Can I say that the government's homeless policy statement was published on the 21st of February 2013. The statement makes explicit the government's commitment to a housing-led approach to end long-term and voluntary homelessness by the end of 2016. There are significant measures being taken under the Dublin Region Homeless Pilot of the Housing Assistance Payment, HAP, the DSP Tenancy Sustainment Protocol, and indeed the purchase of NAMA properties, and a range of other measures relating to the allocation of local authority tenancies. Under these measures, key local authorities were required to prioritise homeless and other vulnerable households in the allocation of tenancies under their control. The 4 Dublin local authorities have been directed to allocate 50% of all available dwellings to this cohort, while the local authorities in counties Cork, Galway, Limerick and Waterford have been directed to allocate 30%. It's expected that as a result of this particular initiative, at least 500 homes will be provided to prioritise households in the Dublin region, with a similar total for the other areas combined. These measures have been identified in the government's implementation plan on the state's response to homelessness, May 2014, and the action plan to address homelessness last December.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Ruth Coppinger has question number